First of all, the course of events in this story happened from 2007 to 2012. However, the actual terrifying encounter in this story happened exactly in 2012, 2 years after my graduation. So, like others who can't get over their horrifying encounters, you're not alone, since this encounter still remains fresh in my mind until now. Before we start the story, let me tell you a short history about my father and his family's struggle in life in the early days as an immigrant in the U.S. My family currently lives in Pennsylvania, Lancaster to be precise, but before that, my paternal side, or my father's family, actually hails from Romania. They immigrated to the U.S. in 1964. My paternal grandfather fled to the West during the last days of World War II. He was not a soldier, nor a collaborator during the war. Being just a regular civilian, he fled to the West due to the widespread bombings in Bucharest. He also feared getting killed, since their house was already damaged by a bomb during an air raid in 1944. Luckily, they survived. When he fled, he was already married and had one kid, who was my oldest paternal uncle. They settled and lived in France for 19 years. My paternal grandpa went into several jobs to earn money there. My dad, along with his siblings, were also born and raised there. By the time they finally immigrated to the U.S., my father was just 5 years old. My father was the fourth out of 5 children. After immigrating to the U.S., they arrived in New York, penniless. They experienced being homeless beggars in the streets for days until my paternal grandfather, along with his oldest son, my oldest paternal uncle, went into several jobs until they were able to make some money and rent an apartment. My paternal grandmother also found a job as a cleaner in various parks, and usually my father, along with his 2 older sisters, my paternal aunts, and his younger brother, my younger paternal uncle, would come there to help her. After that, my father, along with his siblings, would study and work there for a long time. They were all able to finish primary and secondary education. To be short, they became working students during their time studying there. My dad, along with his siblings, also went to college there. They were lucky enough to finish their studies and find a stable job. My dad planned on applying as a teacher after moving to another state, since education was his course in college. Unfortunately for his younger brother, he didn't finish his education due to his vices. Instead of using his money to enroll in college, he would use it to drink in the bar, buy cigarettes, and worst of all, he would use it to buy drugs. Sometimes he would even get into fights with his older siblings, including my dad, for allegedly stealing their cash to use it for his own luxury. They really felt sorry for him. After their parents found out what was happening to him, they forced him to rehabilitate himself for the longest time, and he was only able to walk free by 1981 from the rehabilitation center. Like he promised, he had already changed for the better by the time he was released. Destiny also gave him a second chance, as he was able to find a stable job and meet a woman who gave him all the love and time when they got married. It would take years for my father and his family to find a comfortable life. His 3 siblings moved to other states. However, my paternal grandfather and grandmother decided to just move to Plattsburgh. My younger paternal uncle also decided to live close to them, so he could keep an eye on them due to their old age. My father would finally move to Pennsylvania in 1985. His older siblings moved as early as 1983. He settled and lived in Lancaster, and he also found a job there as a school teacher. Soon after, he will meet and date my mother until they got married. When I was a kid, Romanian language became the first language for me to learn since I was always close with my dad. I admit, I'm a daddy's boy. My mom, however, was always busy with her work as a nurse in a hospital, while my father just worked as a high school teacher. I grew up with no siblings, and honestly, it was so boring as the only child, since I didn't have any younger brother or sister to play and interact with. It took several years for me to fully understand and learn how to speak English. Honestly, that was hard, especially during elementary school. I was a total loner and didn't have any friends, and the worst part is, I was always ridiculed whenever I would try to speak English, since I would always stutter whenever I tried to do it. To be simple, I can compare myself to an alien during my childhood. A kid with no friends, a kid who was always a whipping boy, and a kid who had nothing to defend himself from the judgments he would receive. Anyways, my parents were always here for me, so even if I did get bullied, there would always be someone to stand up for me. I don't want to bring back all the harm on those kids. By that time, I just wanted to live in peace and harmony along with them, so I just ignored the bullies. As time passed by, from 4th grade to 6th grade, I was able to make some friends since my parents noted my advisor that I had trouble speaking English. Luckily, like a gift from heaven, my mother had a friend who was fluent in Romanian, and he volunteered to translate what I was saying without asking any payment in exchange. So he became my interpreter until I was able to fully speak and understand English. At least my stress had been reduced when I was in 4th to 6th grade, since my parents explained my problem to the school authorities, and they allowed my mother's friend to translate what I was saying while at school every day. My advisors every school year knew my situation. They were good and kind to me. My classmates also knew my problem, and they seemed to be good and humble to me as well. My bullying experiences also started to dwindle, as those kids who bullied me received a hard-earned lesson from the school authorities. During that time, my parents also enrolled me to an English tutorial school. The schedule of classes there was every weekend. I would frequently attend the school, mostly during the summer. Most of the kids who attended that school were the same as me. They also couldn't speak and understand English. When I was at high school, my abilities to communicate and understand English seemed to improve well. Now I was able to make friends easily, but I would still stutter sometimes, which would make some students laugh. I no longer experienced bullying that much since I was a consistent honor student until I finished high school. Anyways, back to the story. In 2007, when I was 19, I moved to Harrisburg to go to college. I spent about 4 years studying there. Due to privacy reasons, I won't mention the name of the college I went to. During my first month there, life was good. I lived in a dormitory along with other male students since our dorms were separated from the girls. Our class had many activities to deal with during the first month, so it was hard for me to have some time to talk to my parents or to relax. I also felt stressed and pressured at first, but I soon realized that I would grow up and become more responsible when dealing with our activities. The campus also housed some students with strange and weird personalities. I could tell that I had several encounters with odd students. Some encounters were funny, but others were sketchy. But I accepted the fact that all of us in the campus had different personalities. I made a lot of friends during my first year. One of them was Terry, who became my best friend during most of my college years. Bullying is not an issue in the campus since the system was very good. I also started to actively participate in school clubs and extracurricular activities in the campus, a thing that would make me more socialized. When going back to my hometown and enjoying my time with my family, it only happened fully in the summer. However, during spring break or holidays like Christmas break, we usually spent our time working on projects and presentations while at home. On weekends, we were not spared from every activity and assignment, so we usually spent weekends typing on laptops and researching rather than relaxing and spending time with our families. In 2008, when I was a sophomore in college, I met this girl named Laura who had recently transferred to the university. I met her when Terry and I went to the girls' dormitory as he talked with his girlfriend, Christine. By that time, Laura happened to be Christine's roommate, and they were both friends as well. During our stay there, Laura began asking me several questions like, do I have a girlfriend? She also stated how she would like to date a boy like me. I can say that she was clearly into me, but my main focus by that time was my studies. She also claimed that she was only kidding at that time, so I just continued to answer her questions as simply as I could, without making a sign that I was interested in her. I've never had a girlfriend, but I planned on getting one after I graduated, but by that time, there was a long road for me to walk. A day passed by, and I became a topic among Laura's friends. She apparently told her friends about me, and yes, I became a hot topic to them. Meanwhile, Terry and I decided not to yell it out loud, but to just tell a few friends that we trusted. However, as time went by, Laura started texting me. She was able to get my number via Terry. He did have my phone number since we were close friends. Believe me, it was upsetting at first since it was sensitive information, but I managed to accept it as my best friend provided a deep explanation for me to understand. I admit, at first it was hard to talk to her since I was busy with my studies and I didn't really have an interest in flirting with her. But I later realized that I should grab the opportunity, as Terry told me that Laura was really serious on flirting with me. So I made a life-changing decision. When I texted her back, we started talking on the phone about various stuff about love. After that, we started meeting in person until we started dating officially, and she became my girlfriend after several dates. During our relationship, we both exchanged questions to each other. To be precise, she asked me where I lived. I told her I lived in Lancaster, while she told me that she lived in Lucerne. It was normal, since people who engage in a relationship would expect to have their hometown asked by their fellow partner. I started meeting with her every day. Her calls and texts would become more prevalent than usual. She also introduced me to her friends. They seemed to like me, and I was able to get along with them. As time passed by, I started to know more about her. However, she also started to become overprotective in our relationship. She also started to become annoyed whenever I failed to meet her on time. At first, it was nothing, since I knew that girls like her wanted a good relationship. However, as time went by, I decided to talk to her about my time on my studies. At first, she was upset, but I explained to her deeper and convinced her to approve my decision. Our relationship continued throughout the college years without much conflict other than short arguments. However, things started to get out of hand during our fourth and final year of college. She changed a lot during the final year. She became paranoid to the extreme, doubtful and envious. She would also start arguments with me even within the campus, which would turn into a scene. It was very embarrassing for me. So eventually, I decided to become distant from her and focus more on my studies. However, one night, while I was studying, I heard a knock at the door, so I decided to open it. My roommate was already asleep, so I assumed it was Terry and opened it. I was wrong. It was Laura standing right in my doorway. She had this frustrated look on her face while she was looking at me. She began asking me why I started to distance myself from her. I explained everything to her, and that was it. She angrily left my dormitory without any words. I can't even tell if she even listened to me. One time, while I was heading to my room after the end of my last subject, I saw her inside when I entered. She was vandalizing the room, and to make matters worse, she had been writing something in big letters that said, "You're going to pay for this," on my walls. The sign was written in red. The letters almost looked like they were drawn in blood. It creeped me out a little bit. I immediately took her outside to confront her, but she started to make a scene. It only stopped when the school authorities intervened. Afterwards, I explained everything to them, and there was sufficient evidence for Laura to be suspended for 1 week. My roommate and I were relocated to another room in the dormitory while our previous room was being cleaned up. However, the cleaners found broken glass under my bed while cleaning. Now I knew that she was up to no good with her intentions. After that, Laura started messaging me on my phone. The messages ranged from deep explanations to profanities. She even started threatening me, which is creepy and very disturbing for me. So I eventually had enough and decided to block her. But it doesn't end there, unfortunately. This incident really changed my perspective on Laura, and I'm thankful that I saw her true colors that shined very clearly. After her suspension ended, I decided to break up with her. She didn't say anything to me, but her face looked as sick as a parrot, and she didn't show up for several days. I did apologize to her when I broke up with her, but I also felt sorry for her since I felt that she might be depressed. However, as the days passed by, I still saw her on campus. She continued to attend classes, however, I didn't see her being accompanied by her friends. This made me think that our breakup also had a big impact on her other friendships. However, I didn't expect that she would also use social media to pour her anger to me. One day, while I was surfing Facebook, I saw a post from Laura that had my pictures in it. The post's caption had profanities in it, and it was clearly intended to insult and defame me. I had enough at this point. I reported the post and blocked her on Facebook. I already had enough with her immaturity and malevolent nature, so I just did the right thing. After our breakup, I gained the courage to talk to Terry and my friends and decided to reconcile with them. Our relationship as brothers started to deteriorate when I started dating Laura, so I apologized to them. They accepted my apology and welcomed me back in the squad. One day, I decided to ask Christine about Laura. She said that she hadn't really moved on, and it made things worse. That's the reason why she requested another roommate to replace Laura. According to Christine, Laura's obsession over me caused her to be imprisoned in a quagmire. So to be simple, she became a prisoner of her own woes and misery. She changed a lot after the breakup. She would cry for the longest time, and sometimes she would swear uncontrollably in the room. She also became delusional after our breakup. She continued to live in fantasy while denouncing the reality. Laura also started to show her darker side to everyone. She would get into fights with other students, and she would even make threats. She also started to talk about dark and creepy stuff, which really scared her friends. Scratch marks also appeared on her arm, which made her friends speculate that she was going to kill herself any time, so they confronted her, but it didn't help since she also became violent. She started throwing her objects violently, and she would even harass Christine and her friends. This caused them to distance themselves away from Laura. Those things shocked me a lot. I expected that she would realize her wrongdoings and change for the best, but I was wrong. She changed for the worst. Afterwards, I didn't hear much about Laura. She didn't try to talk to me. In fact, she was always alone. She didn't even apologize to her friends, and it looked like she didn't even have an interest in having friends anymore. Months passed by, and I finally graduated. I was able to erase those bad memories from my mind and finally move on. After graduation, I decided to go back to Lancaster, where I would start my new life. Most of my friends who lived in Harrisburg went to enjoy their new life by partying, while others went on vacation. My other friends, who lived outside the city, meanwhile, returned back to their hometowns, where they celebrated their achievements with their families. All of them would celebrate before they would go job hunting. Christine moved in with Terry. They both lived under one roof in the suburbs of Harrisburg. I stayed in contact with my friends, however, I didn't receive any news about Laura. I expected her to change and finally move on. Meanwhile, after summer, I went into job hunting like the other graduates did. I was lucky enough to find a stable job in my hometown. The salary was good, my fellow coworkers were friendly, my boss wasn't a jerk, and I easily got promoted due to my skills. I also decided to move out of my parents' house, as I bought a new house to live independently. I really expected that my life would be peaceful now. Laura's past actions were not really a big concern for me now. I already planned on facing the future and not reversing to the past, so I did. However, my expectations for a peaceful life were wrong. One evening, after a long, stressful day at work, I was driving back home when I received a call from an unknown number. When I picked up, there was just this breathing on the other end. I hung up since I knew it was just a prank caller. However, when I got home, the number wouldn't stop calling me, only for me to hear the same breathing sound on the other end. I blocked the number and went to sleep. That morning, I saw something in the mailbox outside my house. The mail contained these words: "I don't forgive, and I don't forget," written in red. That reminded me of what Laura wrote on the walls of my dorm room. I threw it in the garbage, since I knew it was just a prank from some kids. One afternoon after my shift ended, I decided to head home. However, before I could even park my car in the garage, I saw some mail at the top of my mailbox. This time, it said, "You can't run, you can't hide, and you can't escape," written in red again. I decided to ask my neighbor about the mail. He said he saw a car hours ago pulling over on the side of the road directly in front of my house, and he saw a girl get out and place the mail on top of the mailbox. That's when my heart dropped. That night, I had so many questions. I knew it was Laura, but how could she know where I lived? My mind was full of questions until I received a call from a random number. I picked up, and I heard a familiar voice saying, "Go outside, I have a gift for you." I was shocked. It was Laura telling me to go out, but how could she possibly trace where I lived? That was my biggest question at that time. I took a deep breath and went out of my house yelling for her to show up, but I was greeted by an eerie silence outside. Not a single car or person passed by in the street. Then, I heard glass shattering behind me. When I looked back, I saw my front window broken. I was very angry. I knew it was Laura, and I was ready to confront her without knowing the dangers behind it. I can't see anything, so I decided to check my window. As I went back to go inside my house, a rock hit me on the head, nearly knocking me unconscious. It didn't stop there. There were rocks hitting me. They came from the woods, which was very close and parallel to my house. I was seriously hurt, so I dashed towards the front door and slammed it shut. Then, I saw pieces of broken glass on the floor. A brick was also on the floor, and it had a sign saying, "You made the wrong choice." I had enough and called the police and explained the whole situation to them. Before the police arrived, I decided to take a peek outside to see if Laura was there, so I slowly opened my door since it didn't have a peephole. I was surprised when a brick suddenly landed on my front porch. I then shut my door and waited for what seemed like an eternity. The police quickly arrived, and I heard them yelling at someone. I then looked through the broken window to see the officers storming through the woods since my house was the very last on the block, and the place is surrounded by trees. After minutes of waiting, the officers knocked on my door. I immediately opened it, and they told me that they saw someone behind a tree near the side street before they got out of their car. The person was wearing all black, and they dashed back into the woods when the officers yelled at them. They chased after them, and they ended up not finding the person. I told them exactly about my speculations about the person they saw, but they said that they couldn't just arrest someone without proper evidence. It was also hard for them to identify whether it was Laura or not, since the person was wearing all black. I gave the brick with the sign on it to the officers so they could use it as evidence. After that, they told me to call them if anything else happens, and then they left. The next few days, nothing happened until one Friday night. I was watching TV when I heard a heavy thud coming from my front door. It sounded like a rock or something, so I decided to open the door and see what it was. I saw another brick with a sign on it. The sign said, "I can see you." That creeped me out, and when I looked out onto the street, there was a white SUV parked directly on the other side of the street, parallel to my house. I decided to confront whoever was there, but when I looked inside the SUV, it was blurred, so I couldn't make out who was in there. I decided to go back inside and shut the door. I felt sleepy, so I decided to turn everything off. I went upstairs to my bedroom and fell asleep shortly after. I woke up around 2:15 in the morning. Strangely, the power was out, so my air conditioner was turned off, and it was hot. I went to find out if there was a blackout, but there clearly wasn't one, since my neighbor's light downstairs was on. That meant someone must have turned off the power switch in my basement. It was very dark, so I fetched my flashlight in my room and headed downstairs. I saw that both my front door and back door were closed, so I went to the basement. My basement had a door outside, however, it had no lock, so someone could easily have broken in and turned the power off. My first thought was that it was an intruder, but I had a feeling it was Laura, since I already knew she was behind the mail, phone calls, and throwing of bricks. As I went down to the basement, I switched the power on, and all the electricity in the house came back on. When the lights in the basement turned on, I saw somebody hiding behind some boxes. I recognized who the person was, and my heart dropped. It was Laura. She was wearing a white dress. Her face was unrecognizable since it had bruises all over it. Her skin was pale white, and she looked like the girl in the ring. She was not the Laura that I met in college, but something worse. My heart started racing as she smiled and asked in a persuading voice, "I wanted to be with you again. Can we?" I then aggressively yelled, "No! Get the hell out of here, or I'm calling the cops!" She stood and started walking towards me, while also staring into my soul. She then pulled something out from behind her back. It was a gun, and she tossed one of the boxes on the floor, only for me to see her deranged obsession for me. There were pictures of me, in college, scattered all over the ground. She said that she intentionally brought all of these along with her to my basement. She also admitted to breaking into my room several times while I was in college. She then picked up one of the pictures. It was a picture of me sleeping in my room in my dormitory. She showed it to me and said in a kidding voice, "You're such a handsome guy, but you wasted such a beautiful diamond like me, so I'm going to make sure that your life is going to be a waste too." She then teared my picture to pieces and aimed the gun at me. I easily evaded it as she fired a shot that surely woke up my neighbors. I then dashed upstairs and tried to lock the basement door, only to fail as she fired another shot at the door. It almost hit me, so I left it wide open as I quickly dashed upstairs and back to my bedroom. I locked my door and hid in my closet. At first, I heard her footsteps going room to room, until the footsteps stopped outside my door. She tried to open the door, but it was locked, so she began pounding and yelling in a frantic voice for me to open the door. Then, there was a brief silence, until she used enough force to break the door down. She began searching the whole room with her gun still drawn. Luckily, she passed my closet. She then looked at my bed, but since the closet was now behind her, I picked up my baseball bat inside the closet, which I always use for self-defense, and took a deep breath. Since my closet door doesn't make a lot of noise when I open or close it, that wasn't a problem anymore. But I still opened the door and tiptoed silently to make sure that her attention wouldn't be drawn to me. Luckily, she didn't hear any noise since she was just standing and staring at my bed like a statue. So before she could even turn around, I took another deep breath and presumed to hit her in the back as hard as I could with my bat. It knocked her unconscious. I then tied her up in a chair so she couldn't escape and called the police and took her gun. The police arrived shortly. They entered my house, and by that time, Laura started to regain her consciousness as she was handcuffed by the police. She began threatening me and even tried to attack me, but she ended up being tackled by the police officers. After that, I pressed charges against her. However, during her trial, she was declared mentally insane due to her behavior in the courtroom. This led to her being sent to a mental asylum instead. It wasn't a major concern for me anymore, since the asylum had a strong and maximum security, so it would be a real pain in her butt if she tried to escape. Laura apparently had a mental disorder that encompasses extreme obsession, which is dangerous when left uncontrolled. She went into a psychiatric therapy during the course of her trial to determine if she was mentally insane or not. My family and friends knew the incident, and I recount one time when I met with Terry and Christine in a bar. They explained Laura's ultimate fate after the graduation. She apparently went missing for 12 days after the graduation. Her older brother began contacting her friends, including them, but they didn't know where she went. However, one student did contact her brother and said that she was last seen in a bar drinking. This concerned her brother very much, so he filed a missing persons report to the police station. However, he never received any news after that. However, one fateful morning, she returned home crying. Apparently, she walked kilometers to reach her home, and she slept in the streets for days. The reason? Her wallet was stolen in the bar, and she was drunk by that time, and she arrived home penniless. Months passed by, and her brother started to witness her strange behavior, so he urged her to consult a psychologist, but she refused. Her brother was really concerned about her, so he still forced her to do so. This resulted in a conflict between them. After that, she left suddenly one early morning without leaving any mail, as her brother woke up and didn't see her anywhere in the house. He began coordinating with the police to track her down, but all of their efforts failed ultimately. During her trial, Laura confessed in the courtroom that the firearm she brought that night was owned by her brother. Apparently, she stole the gun from her brother's drawer while he was sleeping that night before her departure. She also admitted that she was behind all the phone calls, letters, and bricks being thrown at me. I later found out that she was able to trace me by having some of my personal information. While we were still dating, I decided to give her some of my personal information. I gave her my phone number and told her where my hometown was, since I trusted her very much at that time. When I moved into my new house, she was still able to track it by simply asking one of my neighbors if they knew me. Of course they knew me, so it was a piece of cake for her to find where I lived. Honestly, one small mistake that I made almost killed me, yet I was lucky enough to dodge the bullet. From now on, I wouldn't trust a person easily. I would observe their behavior and personality before I could fully trust them. I would also become more private of my personal information, so I won't end up witnessing a random guy breaking into my house. Afterwards, I moved out of that house and decided to live near my parents' house to be closer to them. I haven't heard about Laura ever since. Besides, I don't want to hear anything about her ever again. It's very disturbing to think what a person can do just because of an obsession. What's up, everybody? This is the Lone Wolf here. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you all enjoyed this story. I want to give a big thank you to the Redditor who allowed me to read his ex-girlfriend's story in this video. There will be a link to his Reddit post in the description below for anyone who's looking to read it. So I have a quick announcement for you guys. I won't be premiering next week. I'm going to be on vacation for pretty much all week next week, so I figured I'd take that week off. My next video will be premiering on July 25th at 8 p.m. as always. Just thought you guys should know. Anyways, if you're new to the channel, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you enjoyed the narration. Hit the bell for notifications and join the Lone Wolf Pack. If any of you guys want to send me a message or maybe a personal scary story that you would like me to read, there will be a link to my email account and my Twitter account in the description below. There will also be links in the description for the music artists that I used in this video, as well as the individual tracks that I used in case anyone is interested in the music. And last but certainly not least, if any of you guys have any ideas or tips for me to make my channel even better, please leave me a comment or send me a personal message. Until next time, stay spooky. And remember, the hunt begins when the moon is full. See you soon.